This is the second lecture of Unit 1. Homeostasis is the body's attempt to maintain a consistent environment. This is done through a series of feedback loops to regulate and respond to what is going on. The receptor acts similar to a thermostat in your house in detecting a change in the temperature. The control center is going to take that input from what the conditions are for the body and make the appropriate response to deal with the situation. Then the effector is going to carry out the change the control center determines to be appropriate in this situation. Most of what the body attempts to do is maintain homeostasis and keep things stable. With the negative feedback loop, the body notices a change and attempts to reverse the change. This is the most common type of feedback loop. The example presented on the slide involves thyroid hormones. The level of T3 and T4 are reported back to the hypothalamus, which will tell the thyroid to produce more if levels are low, less if levels are high. Positive feedback loops are going to detect a change in the body and then reinforce that change. These are far less common, and there are only a couple of examples. One example is during the labor and delivery process. The body detects a change and increases the uterine contractions and reinforces that with intensifying the contractions. Without this reinforcement, the labor and delivery process would never progress. The other example is when blood clots. There is a hemorrhage in the body, and it responds by increasing the clotting of blood. The reaction needs to be reinforced to make sure there is enough clotting to stop the problem. This animation is going to show you some examples of how positive and negative feedback loops work.
The human body is often exposed to large variations in the external environment, such as climate, diet, and stress. Despite these variations, the internal environment needs to be maintained in a relatively unchanging and stable state. Changes in internal variables, such as body temperature, blood pressure, and levels of hemoglobin, cannot exceed a certain tolerance without jeopardizing the health or survival of an organism. The maintenance of the internal environment within these narrow limits is referred to as homeostasis. Read these interesting facts and answer our short quiz to proceed to the next module, where we look at negative feedback, the underlying mechanism by which homeostasis operates. Here we have a variable represented by the seesaw that must be maintained within a certain range of values. When an external stimulus causes this variable to change beyond an acceptable range, a sensor, which is monitoring the state of the variable, detects this variation and relays the information to a control center. The control center is now alerted to the fact that the variable is outside the acceptable range or set point, and in turn causes the effector to respond to counteract this change, both in magnitude and direction, so as to return the variable to its initial stable state. This negative feedback loop, which begins with a stimulus and ends with a response, is the underlying mechanism by which homeostasis maintains a balance in order to ensure optimal metabolic efficiency. In the next module, we will see how this response loop operates in a biological example. In this example of biological homeostasis, we will be looking at how the human body maintains a stable core body temperature. The set point for human body temperature is typically about 37 degrees Celsius and is maintained by ensuring a balance between heat gain and heat loss through the mechanism of homeostasis. A stimulus, for example a drop in the temperature of the external environment, will be detected by temperature sensors in the human skin. An impulse will be sent by way of the afferent pathway to the central nervous system, and in this case to the hypothalamus, whose main function is homeostasis. On the basis of this sensory input, the hypothalamus sends signals by way of the efferent pathway to the effectors, causing them to respond in such a manner as to counterbalance the impact of the initial stimulus. Appropriate responses may include shivering, that is, muscle groups involuntarily contracting and relaxing to increase body heat, or a decrease in blood flow close to the skin in order to retain heat within the body. These reflex-type actions may also be accompanied by behavioural changes, such as putting on a jacket to retain body heat, or going for a run to generate body heat. In the next module, we consider the role of homeostasis in some other life forms.
So you will also find this link available in the additional materials so that you can view this again outside of class if you would like. Anatomical terms are used to describe where things are in the body and what direction you are referring to without confusion. In order to do this, we must first establish what position will be our frame of reference, and we call this the anatomical position. In anatomical position, the body faces forward, the palms face up, and the toes point down. Regardless of what position the body you are describing is in, you would refer to the terms as if it was in anatomical position. Please see the following link on the page to read some additional material on this. We will start with some basic terms. When referring to something being on the head or towards the head, we use the term superior, versus towards the tail or bottom of the torso we refer to as inferior. The older terms you will still see are cranial or cephalic in place of superior, and caudal for towards the tail. Posterior or dorsal refers to the back side of the body, while anterior or ventral refers to the front side of the body. Medial refers towards something being in or towards the midline, while lateral is towards the sides of the body. These terms can also be used in comparison of structures to describe where they are relative to other parts. When referring to the limbs, we use the term distal to refer to farther away from the core or torso of the body, while proximal refers to something closer to the core or center of the body. These eliminate much of the confusion that can occur with using other terms for the arms and legs, especially if they are in positions other than anatomical position. Superficial refers to something being close to the surface of the body, while deep refers to something being inside the body. For example, the skin is superficial to the muscle, or the muscle is deep to the skin. The terms prone and supine are used to describe the position of the body. If the body is lying on its back, we refer to it as supine, while it is prone if it is lying on its stomach. You may hear these referred to as facing up or facing down. In general, it is less confusion to use prone and supine, so there is no misunderstanding if the head is turned to the side slightly. You would commonly find the head turned to the side slightly in a living patient who needs to breathe while in the prone position. This picture illustrates the different directions and locations of the anatomical terms. The body can be divided up into different planes. This is useful when you are looking at a view of the inside of the body and you need to establish the frame of reference, or from which direction you are viewing the body. It's also useful in making cuts in the body to determine which direction to go. Sagittal is going to divide the body into right and left parts. Mid-sagittal also divides the body into right and left parts, but they are equal right and left parts, divided directly down the midline. Mid-sagittal is a further specification of sagittal. You will only see the mid-distinction in the sagittal plane because there is no symmetry to the body between the anterior and posterior, or superior and inferior. A frontal or coronal cut is going to divide the body into anterior or posterior parts, while a transverse or horizontal cut divides the body up into superior and inferior. These are similar to using the three planes used in math to make cuts in the body on the x, y, and z axis. The body can be divided up into different cavities. These are also useful when describing where you would find things in the body. The dorsal cavity is going to contain the brain and the spinal cord. While this may seem like an odd pairing at first, it comes from the embryological development of the brain forming from the primitive spinal cord folding forward, so they are both in the same cavity. This is divided into a cranial cavity that contains the brain and a vertebral cavity that contains the spinal cord. We also have a ventral cavity, which is subdivided into additional regions. The thoracic portion contains the heart, lungs, and there are tubes, or all of the structures contained within the rib cage. The abdominal pelvic sits below the rib cage and is further subdivided into the abdominal and pelvic cavities. The abdominal cavity is below the ribs and above the pelvic bowl and contains many of the digestive organs. The pelvic cavity is in the area of the pelvic bowl and contains some of the digestive and reproductive organs. Additional spaces referred to include the mediastinum, which is the space between the lungs where the heart and its vessels sit. Retroperitoneal refers to the space behind the peritoneal cavity in the abdomen. If you were to imagine an animal carcass being cleaned out by a hunter with all of the organs removed, what you would see is the peritoneal cavity. The kidneys are described as retroperitoneal because they sit posterior to that membrane lining the cavity. In some cases, it is necessary to further divide up the abdominal pelvic region. For example, if you note a mass on a patient but had not identified exactly what it was yet, the lesion would be described along with a description of its location. One method divides the area up into 9 sections, called the right and left hypochondriac, epigastric, right and left lumbar, umbilical, right and left iliac, and hypogastric. If for some reason you find a lesion that is right on the border of 2 of these sections, there is another system that can be used as well. This divides the abdominal pelvic area up into 4 quadrants. These are the right and left upper quadrant, the right and left lower quadrants. If you find the lesion, you will be able to determine which of these systems will be most appropriate. But if you are reading notes from someone else, it is important that you understand where something is based off of someone else's description of where things are. Please follow the link and read the section noted on this page. The best way to become familiar with these anatomical terms is to use them. Use them to describe everything you can, from where things are in your car or home to the direction you are moving. By making them part of your everyday language, you will quickly become comfortable and familiar with these terms.